Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy Monday to you. Big Tasty here, back with another NBA breakdown. Yesterday, obviously, if you followed me, did not go well on the betting side of things. Was having a really good week until yesterday, and that kind of blew it all to shit. But that's the way it goes sometimes. I feel like the breakdowns on a lot of the games were good. There were a couple that were really bad, to be honest. So, gonna keep grinding, trying to keep locking things in, and really with these breakdowns, I'll put my plays out, but my hope is that you pick up some stuff from the breakdown of these games that can help you make your decisions, even if those are games that I'm not on. And so, hope to give you some good information. And we're going to do that again today. Another reminder, if you do want to be able to access these breakdowns not on the stream, just kind of anytime you want, an easy way to do that is to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Big Tasty Sports on YouTube. So go subscribe, and then you can check these out whenever you want. All right, let's get into the games for today. First one up, we have the Jazz and the Pistons. The Jazz are playing their fifth game in 7 days, but actually the Pistons are too. That's actually a kind of a theme, as a lot of these teams are playing a lot of games right now. Maybe some of that is trying to make up for the games that were lost because of COVID and stuff, but a lot of teams are playing a lot. It looks like Gay, Gobert, and Ingles will still be out because of the COVID protocols. Now, once in a while, there's news that breaks late where one of these guys gets ruled in that I didn't see coming, but I think that those three should still be out today. On Detroit's side, they're pretty healthy, actually. They have just Jeremy Grant is still out, but he's been out, so that's not really news. Looking at how these teams have performed here recently, in the last six away from home for Utah, they've averaged 113 and a half per game, and they've averaged giving up 111.5. Their range on offense has been between 108 and 120, so that's a little bit dialed in. Like a 10 to 12 point range isn't that big. On defense, it's been a little bigger. They've allowed anywhere from 104 to 125. Detroit, in their last six, they have, again, not scored the ball great. They've been under 100 points in 3 out of those 6 games. And then they've allowed a pretty decent amount of points in a number of those. I wanted to zero in specifically on the games they played against Charlotte, Milwaukee, and San Antonio, because all 3 of those teams are top 10 in pace. Utah is number 12, so they sit just outside that top 10, but they've been playing relatively fast lately. And Detroit is number 9 in pace. So I think the reason I wanted to look at that is when Detroit plays a team that plays up in pace, I think they kind of go with them. And maybe they're not a strong enough team if they play someone who slows it down to try to get the game to be at the pace they want it to be. So I'd expect this game to be a little bit paced up tonight, especially with Gobert likely out again. In those 3 games that Detroit played against those teams that play with more pace, they scored 111, 115, and 105. So those were the 3 games where they really did score more. They gave up 140 to Charlotte, but they only gave up 106 to Milwaukee and 105 to San Antonio. So I think these pace up games are a decent spot for Detroit, a spot where they maybe thrive a little bit better. In terms of personnel specific stuff, looking at the Jazz with and without Gobert, he definitely makes a significant defense or difference for them on defense, especially ironically. But so offensive rating with Gobert is 118.4, and without him is 115. So 3.5 points different in terms of offensive rating. That's relatively, I mean, it's not massive, but it's significant. The defensive side is the big deal, though. So their defensive rating without Gobert is 121.8, just getting styled on. When he does play, the defensive rating is 108.3, which is really solid. And this is reflected in the points. So without Gobert, the Jazz are allowing 118.67 points a game, where with him, they only allow 106.11. So, and then the other big thing is rebounds. With Gobert, they have 47.4 rebounds a game, and without him, they only have 41. So, all this to say that Detroit, if this game gets played up in pace, that's where Detroit tends to score a little bit better than if the game gets slowed down. And without Gobert in there, Utah tends to give up a lot of points. That doesn't mean they're not going to win. They're definitely the superior team still, and definitely superior offensively. But I think it's an interesting spot for Detroit to maybe be able to score a little bit more, get over that like 105 mark that they don't always do. On the Detroit side, Isaiah Stewart just came back, and I watched the last game and just was really not impressed with Isaiah Stewart. He reminds me a little bit of Montrezl Harrell in that he's really active, And he is involved in a lot of plays, but man, his offensive game is just brutal. And he's not big enough to influence the big guys on defense. Maybe he'll be able to do a little better without Gobert in there playing against guys who are a little bit smaller on defense. I think he needs that. So when you look at Isaiah Stewart, it's not a massive difference. So on defense, their Pistons defensive rating is 114.7 without him and 111.2 with him. So 3 points better. So a little bit better on defense. In terms of the offensive rating, it's 101.9 with him and 103 without him. So not a massive difference, but a slightly better team on offense when he's not playing, actually. Looking at Utah playing teams that are top 10 in pace since November 9th, they actually haven't had a ton of these games. They had 7 games where they've played teams in the top 10 in pace, which Detroit is. And they've gone over 120 points in 5 out of those 7. The other 2 are 110 and 112. So again, I think that this is a spot with some of the other guys back for Utah now against a Detroit team that's not phenomenal on defense, but that plays up in pace where they could actually score a decent amount. And so I haven't made any bets on this game. I think I have some interest in both team totals over. In the over for the game, the spread is 11.5, which seems really wide to me just looking at the numbers here. I think if anything, I'd be interested in the plus 11.5 on Detroit, but probably staying away from this one. In terms of trends, really bad against the spread trends for both of these teams, and then a strong under trend for Utah. In matchup specific trends, Utah's 7-3 against the spread in their last 10 against Detroit, 16-5 in their last 24 at Detroit. And then the under is 10-3 in the last 13 here. So that's something that gives me a little bit of pause, but we do have to remember that most of those games are probably with Gobert in the lineup, which he is not going to be, and that just makes a huge difference in terms of the potential for Detroit to score. So that's what we're looking at for the Jazz and the Pistons. Next game up today is the Bucks and the Hornets. We just saw this game a couple days ago. Charlotte won 114-106. Thankfully, had a collab with Blaze Bets that day on Charlotte's money line, so we got that one, which was good. One really interesting thing from that game is that Milwaukee had a 12-point quarter. Now, obviously, teams lay an egg sometimes for one quarter, but that's really brutal, and you don't see Milwaukee be that bad offensively in a specific quarter. It looks like Allen, Hill, Holiday, and Lopez are still going to be out in this game. The biggest deal here is Holiday being out. The Bucks are 10 points worse in offensive rating when Holiday is out, and 3 points worse in defensive rating when he's out. So I actually, when I went to look at that, figured that Holiday would make a bigger difference on defense than he does on offense, but it was the reverse. But cumulative, it's like a 13-point difference in offensive defensive rating without Holiday. So I think it really hurts them for him to be out. I went and looked specifically at season averages compared to this last game to try to get a feel for if there's regression back towards season averages by both of these teams. What should we expect? As you might think, given the score, Memphis was worse than their season average in almost every category. They did have more rebounds, 53 compared to 47.1, but they had less assists by 2 than their season average. They shot the ball about 4% worse, and they were right around their season average in 3-point percentage. But if you factor in what Charlotte allows on average for the season, and I won't go through all those numbers for you, but if you work through kind of all of that, what Milwaukee averages, what Charlotte usually gives up, and then what happened in that first game, I would expect them to be about 4% better in terms of field goal percentage, which would have equaled 7.2 points of difference. So Milwaukee scored 106 in that first game. I definitely expect them to be higher this game. I don't necessarily expect them to be up at like 125 or whatever, but I think at least around that 115 mark. Charlotte, on the other hand, they were right around their season average in most of the categories, off by a little. They were a little bit over in assists, a little bit under in field goal percentage, a little bit under in 3-point percentage. But again, if you factor in what Milwaukee allows, and I factored in without Drew Holiday, so what they allow without Drew, season averages for Charlotte, what they did in that first game, my expectation was that they would have a slightly higher field goal percentage and maybe slightly higher 3-point percentage. scoring 1 to 4 more points than they did in that first game. So when I look through all of that, my expectation here is that this game does end with a higher total than the first one. But still, this total is set at 234.5, which seems pretty high to me. I'd expect this game to be around 116, 115. Charlotte is what I have it lined at. Charlotte is +2 right now. Milwaukee's -2. So that's not enough for me to really want to jump on a side, but I think I still would slightly lean Charlotte with the points here. This is definitely something I'll be watching live because the way these two teams can go on runs, I think there's a chance to get really good numbers on the spread and on the total that are better than what you can get pregame here. And then as far as the total, I had it, somewhere maybe around 231, and right now it's 234.5. So again, I would lean toward the under, but I'm not going to go there pregame. I'll definitely look at it more live. In terms of trends, some interesting trends in these two teams specifically. Milwaukee's 1-8 against the spread in their last 9 at Charlotte. I mean, that's getting to be pretty substantial. And then the under is 5-1 in the last 6 at Charlotte between these two teams. So again, both of those point to what I said in terms of leaning toward Charlotte with the points and leaning toward the under. But again, I think if you are able to do it and can watch this live, you could get better lines on any of that stuff than you can pregame. Next up is the Spurs and the Knicks. Spurs are on their 5th game in 7 days all away. This is the last game of a road trip. This is something I definitely want to start paying attention to. I think the Spurs are more disciplined than the Hawks, but the Hawks were on the last game of a long road trip last night, and you could just see absolutely zero energy from them. And I do think it's something to watch here with the Spurs playing 5 games in 7 days all on the road. That's a lot. And so I could see them coming in here against the Knicks without their best game or their most energetic game. They're going to be without KJ, Vassell, and White again tonight. McDermott may be back, though, which I think is definitely a positive for them. They really need shooting. And since he hasn't been playing, maybe he'll be a little bit more rested. They are 1-5 on this road trip, so they haven't really been playing well. Again, DeJounte Murray was out for the first 3 of the games on this road trip. He's been back in for the last 3, but now with White out, it just messes with their rotation. On the Knicks side, Evan Fournier, Nerlens Noel, and Kemba Walker are all game time decisions, so we'll see what happens there. They're on 2 or 3 days of rest here. I think it's 3, but maybe it's 2. And they're actually 5-2 against the spread on 2 or 3 days of rest. So this isn't a terrible spot for them, I don't think. Looking specifically for the Spurs at how they do with Murray in and out and with White in and out, it's not as big of a difference as you would think with DeJounte Murray. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. The numbers are not as wide as I'd expect them to be. When you watch the game, there's absolutely no doubt that he drives this team and they kind of go as he goes. So he does make a massive difference. And I like them a ton more with him in, but just purely based on the numbers, their offensive rating is only about 2.5 points better, and their defensive rating is a 0.25 point worse. In terms of the point they score, though, that's where there is a bigger difference, and that's why I like to look at offensive rating because it takes more into account. But he may drive the pace a little bit more, too, because they score 15 more points a game with him in than with him out. So they are definitely way better offensively. Then when you look at Derek White being out, they're actually 7 points better in offensive rating when he plays compared to when he doesn't. So I think that almost offsets DeJounte Murray. I think they're a much better team when both these guys are in. And their defensive rating is a little worse. So I actually, when I first looked at this line last night, I thought, oh my gosh, how do you not take anyone against the Knicks at +6.5 or +7? But after diving into the numbers, and especially with the Spurs being on the end of this long road trip, I think it's a dicey situation for the Spurs. When I lined this game, I had the Knicks -7 and the total at 205. The Knicks are -6.5 and the total's 213. So, obviously from what I have there, I have a little bit of a lean toward the under. But again, as volatile as these two teams are and as volatile as this situation is, I'm a little hesitant. Looking at the trends, there wasn't a ton to see there. There is a strong under trend for the Knicks, and the under is 5-1 in the last 6 when these two teams play in New York. So again, I lined this with an under, and there are definitely trends pointing to the under. That's something I actually may consider. I haven't made a bet on that yet, but that's probably the one that I would consider in this game. Next game up, we have the Pacers, who should be pretty much back to full strength here. They haven't been for a while, and the Celtics, who suck. Man, this was another game when I first looked at it and then saw Boston -7. I was like, man, I got to take Indiana here, right? Like Boston just sucks pretty much every game. And so if I feel similarly to the Knicks, like any team against them getting 6 or 7 points feels like a good spot. But definitely wanted to dive into the numbers to see if that actually seemed true or not. Um, so let's see, what do we have here? Boston's on their fourth game in 6 days, so they've been playing a lot. And as per usual, they have not been scoring well. In their last five at home, they've been under 100 points in 3 out of 4, and one of the other ones was 100. So they scored 123 against Phoenix, but other than that, they've been at 100 or less. They have played pretty well on defense, though. They don't give up many points either. That's been 100 or less in 4 out of the 5 as well. And the other game, they only gave up 108 to Phoenix. So this is a team that isn't giving up a lot of points to anybody right now. What I did is, man, if I could show you here, I don't know if you can see that. I've got like 2 full pages diving into the numbers on these two teams in terms of their team totals. I looked at what happens when Indianapolis, shit, dude, I'm in Indiana. When Indiana scores 107 or more, and then when Boston scores 110 or more, with this total at 214, those just seem like good numbers to look at since December 1st. Dove into what happens with rebounds, assists, field goals, 3-point percentage, and then the combination between field goal and 3-point percentage. And then looked at what the other team allows too. Like when Boston allows 107 or more points, what happens? When Indiana allows 110 or more, what happens? And basically, like after diving into all of that stuff, and I won't bore you with all the numbers, though, again, if anybody else is a geek like this and you want to see the actual numbers here, I'd be happy to share those with you. What it comes down to is I think that Indiana has maybe around a 45% chance to score 107 or more. But combine that with the fact that Boston's been playing great defense, I think it's more likely that they stay under that 107. And then on the Boston side of things, I think there's around I'd say 55% chance, maybe 58% chance that they score 110 or more. That's real dicey though, man. It's just hard to trust Boston right now. So I do, lean a little bit toward them scoring more today against Indiana, but really just hard to nail that down. So when I lined this game, I had it as about -5 for Boston with a total of 212, and it's a 214 total in Boston's -7. So all that said, I don't see a ton of value on either side here. Looking at trends, there are strong under trends for both of these teams. But the over is 5-1 in the last 6 when they play each other. So again, the trends kind of point in both directions, and it's hard to nail anything down there. So that's a game where hopefully some of the numbers can help you, but I just don't see a lot of strong edges against two teams who are really inconsistent. Next game up is the 76ers and the Rockets. How can you not love to take anyone to score points against the Rockets right now? They just gave up 141 to Minnesota yesterday, which was awesome. I love seeing it. It looks like Maxey and Milton may both still be out for the 76ers here, and then Sengun is still out for the Rockets. This is a back-to-back for Houston. They're 1-5-1 against the spread on a back-to-back, but they're 7-0 to the over on a back-to-back. These teams did just play on January 3rd, and Philadelphia won 133 to 113. That was in Philadelphia, so really dominated. I spent a lot of time looking specifically at different quarters and halves for these two teams because when a spread gets to be this wide, I don't like to take double-digit spreads in general. Even though Philadelphia -10.5, I don't think is terrible given how bad Houston has been on defense lately. I mean, they're giving up 129.4 points per game in their last 5 at home. That's just absolutely atrocious. They've given up 124 or more in 4 out of those 5. The other one was 120, so all over 120. So I mean, I do really love Philadelphia. I mean, I'd love almost anyone against Houston right now, but with that 10.5 spread, I'm interested if there's an angle in terms of quarters or halves that might be better. But when you break it all down, I think it's a decent bet to take Philly minus 3.5 in the first quarter. That's not a terrible spot. It definitely happens more than not for both of these teams. Houston's been pretty bad in the first quarter, but it's not strong enough to me that I think it's a better bet than the full game here. In terms of trends, very strong against the spread trends for Philadelphia and very bad ones for Houston. There's pretty good over trends for Philly and extremely strong over trends for Houston. And then in this matchup specifically, Philadelphia is 7-3 against the spread in their last 10 against Houston. So all of that numbers wise and trends wise points toward it being a good spot for Philadelphia and a good spot for the over. I actually did already take the over 226.5 in this game. And I'm thinking about taking Philly minus 10.5 because I think that both of those are probably among the better spots I see on this card so far. Two more games to get to today. Next up is the Nets and Portland. The Nets will have Kyrie back, and it looks like they should have Aldridge back, though he is still a game-time decision. They are on a back-to-back flying from Brooklyn all the way to Portland today, so a long flight after their game yesterday. But Kyrie and Aldridge both didn't play, so if they're back, they should be a little fresher. Brooklyn is only 1-3-1 against the spread on back-to-backs. Portland is 3-4 against the spread on back-to-backs, so not phenomenal either, and they're on a back-to-back as well. Obviously still missing McCollum and Lillard. Likely, I think, for sure missing Powell as well, so that's another piece that they have out. In the last 5 games, Portland played, I guess, well defensively against the Kings yesterday. Though watching that game, the Kings were throwing the ball away. They went 1 for 16 in their first 17 from three-point range. Just absolute train wreck, atrocious on offense for the Kings. So I'm not sure how much it was Portland's defense as much as it was the Kings' offense being bad. And Portland in their last 5 at home, if you take out that game against the Kings yesterday, they've given up 114, 115, 131, and 132. They've allowed 38.8%, 48, 45, 54, 55% from the field, given up over 40% in 3 out of the 4 games from three-point range. They're averaging, or they're the lowest they've given up, except for the Kings, in terms of field goal percentage and three-point percentage combined, is 88.5. That is incredibly high. Since November 5th, when Brooklyn hits that, they tend to score a ton of points, almost always 120 or more. However, they don't do it a lot. They haven't done that in their last 6 games. And so I guess the question is whether they can do that or not. And Brooklyn's team total is set at 118.5 in this game. Even when they hit that 88.5 combined from field goal and three-point range, they're still only 6-3 over 118.5. And so it's just a lot of points for the Nets to score. And granted, they scored well in their first game with Kyrie back, and I think they're going up against a bad defense here. I certainly can see them doing it. And in fact, if I had to bet, I would bet that they do. But just saying it's a higher number than I would want to see. On the other side, Brooklyn has actually been pretty bad on defense recently. They had been a really good defensive team throughout most of the year, top 5 or top 6 for most of the year. But if you look at their last 10 games, they've only had 1 game with a defensive rating under 100, which they were doing regularly before. And they've had 3 games with a defensive rating over 120, 3 more with a defensive rating between 110 and 119. They're not a better defensive team with Kyrie back in the mix. So Brooklyn does not have it working on defense right now. And I think this is a spot where Portland could potentially score some points. They've been shooting it really well, especially from three-point range. And maybe they can keep that going tonight. In terms of trends in this game, bad against the spread trends for both teams. In terms of matchup specific, Brooklyn is 4-0 against the spread in their last 4 at Portland. So I line this game as Brooklyn -8 and a total of 232. Right now, the line is Brooklyn -9.5 and a total of 227.5. So, I would lean a little bit toward the over, but again, I don't think the edge is big enough that I'm going to just be jumping on it full on. This is another game I'll probably watch live to see, especially how Portland is doing offensively, if they seem to be shooting okay or not. And then I may get on it if the number seems right. Last game of the day is the Cavs and the Kings. This is a game that, going into breaking it down, the Cavs are at -5, and I thought that would be a hammer spot for them. They got destroyed by the Warriors last night in Clay's return, scored terribly, and I thought, man, surely they're going to bounce back against a terrible Kings team. And maybe they will, but the numbers are kind of talking me off of hammering this spot for Cleveland. The biggest thing is that without Ricky Rubio, Cleveland has been pretty bad. With Rubio, their defensive rating was 105.5. They've been like a top 5 defensive team. But since Rubio went out, their defensive rating has been 115.1, which is among the worst in the league. So they've just been atrocious. And granted, for a couple of those games, they were without Allen as well, but they've just been bad. In terms of offensive rating, that's actually been about the same. With Rubio, 111.4. Without him, 110.4. So the offensive rating hasn't been as atrocious as the defensive, but Cleveland is not the same team without Rubio. They're only averaging 103.5 points per game since he went out, and they're giving up 107, which is definitely higher than their average had been. On the other side, Sacramento, we know that they are freaking terrible. I keep betting on them for some reason. Well, and I know the reason, because the numbers point in that direction in the spots that I'm taking. And I really try to bet the numbers, not bet based on feelings. But it's getting hard to ignore the feelings with the Kings, because I think I've lost 3 or 4 in a row with them betting numbers that look good. In their last 7, they're only scoring 102.3 points per game, and they're giving up 110. So really not scoring well at all. This is a team that when I think of them, I would think of them more as a team that scores a lot and gives up a lot, but more recently that hasn't been the case. They should have Rashawn Holmes back tonight, which is a big deal. Going up against this big lineup of Cleveland, they need his size inside. He actually doesn't make as massive of a difference as you would think in terms of like offensive, defensive rating. Their defensive rating is 4 points better when he's playing compared to when he's not. But he doesn't make very much of a difference on offense. So I think they do need him in this matchup, and that's going to be helpful, but maybe doesn't make as big of a difference as I would have thought. The total in this game is all the way up at 220. Well, I say all the way up just because I just walked through how bad both of these teams have been on offense here recently. But obviously, like I said, Cleveland's been terrible on defense. But that 220 total, Cleveland's only gone over that in 1 of their last 6. And Sacramento's gone over it in 3 of their last 7. So not exactly a huge endorsement of an over here. On the trend side of things, very bad against the spread trends for Sacramento. Strong under trends on the Cleveland slide. And then in this matchup specifically, though, Sacramento is 6-2 against the spread in their last 8 against Cleveland. The under is 4-0 in the last 4 between these teams. So the trends point to Sacramento with the points and to the under. I have not made any bets on this game based purely on numbers. I actually lined this as Cleveland -1 and a total of 213. Right now it's Cleveland -5 and a total of 220. So, man, I'm a little interested in the under here, but I just don't know if I can go back to betting on a Kings game, at least for a couple days. So I may end up staying off of it. This, again, feels like it just feels back and forth to me right now, where some days it feels like there's good spots pregame, and then other days it just feels like you want to wait to live bet because the lines are likely to be way better than what you can get pregame. So this may be a day where I end up waiting on a lot more live than I do taking things straight up. Keep one eye on the national championship game and one eye on the NBA for me. So as always, appreciate you tuning in for this. Would love comments, feedback. DM me. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel, Big Tasty Sports. Like, retweet on Twitter. I really do appreciate all that stuff, guys. Thankful for you tuning in. Hope this information is helpful. I hope you have a great day. See you on Twitter.